Hello, my name is Cheryl Waltman, and I will be giving a brief overview of concepts and procedures the novice researcher might need to know before proceeding with a research plan. The preliminary stage should already be near complete before proceeding with the formalities and procedures involved in conducting dissertation research. Once your research plan is drafted, the first official hurdle is secure approval from the IRB. The bulk of my presentation will guide you through the steps you'll need to take to be sure your ducks are in a row before submitting IRB paperwork. Will you use humans or will you study with animals? Human research participants are protected by the IRB. However, if you plan to use animals, the approval will come from the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. Most social sciences researchers conducting experimental studies will likely use human subjects. As we move forward, information will be geared toward that supposition. Based on the teachings of Christensen, Taylor, and Johnson, 2015, the following items should be addressed in research design in order to ensure the best chance of IRB approval. Your study needs participants if it is experimental. The focus of your research should suggest a target population. One simple way to recruit participants is by using a web survey. The American Psychological Association hosts a website for advertising internet studies, as does the Social Psychology Network. Now that you know where you can find volunteers for your study, you need to know what type of research you will conduct and which statistical analyses will be used before you can arrive at the proper sample size. How many people would it take to make your test results valid? The statistical power of your data is an important factor and consideration. You will need enough participants to ensure that you have a power of at least 0.80, meaning you can correctly reject a false hypothesis at least 80% of the time. The law of large numbers suggests that the more participants are involved, the higher power becomes. This becomes a problem in that you'll want the smallest sample size possible from an economic standpoint, but it has to be large enough to detect the effects of manipulating variables. Fortunately, a literature review within your field will inform you about the effect size. Before you wail and whine that there's no research in your field, there are sources of acceptable numbers to use. Jacob Cohen has formulas and suggestions that can be located by a simple Google search, or you might start with effect size calculation at the noted website. Nuts and bolts. Each of these research facets is critical in spelling out the details needed for IRB approval. It is actually the types of variables and how they are to be presented that determine the instrumentation and measurement modes a researcher will need. Whether the variables in question are data from a psychometric instrument or biometric data, the researcher must carefully consider the best methodology, meaning the least likely to produce errors. The IRB will require a specific rundown of the research plan, from whether the experimenter smiles at participants as they enter to how the participants are dismissed, much like a script. Scheduling human participants can be a daunting task, and the researcher needs to consider that there will be no-shows and never-shows. Plan B should include backup participants. Finally, you may solicit informed consent following IRB guidelines. Full instructions, likely benefits, exact procedures, any benefits or compensation should be included. Ta-da! Then it's data time. You're good to go. These four aspects of research with human participants must be taken into consideration from an ethical and procedural standpoint. If your research involves any populations who could be more vulnerable to harm in the investigation, such as pregnant women, children, people with mental impairments, or prisoners, more stringent requirements apply in obtaining informed consent. Your participants are entitled to the most specific, concise instructions possible, with no room for semantic doubt. Repetition is even recommended. As I used to tell my English students in middle school, the reader is not inside your head. They don't know exactly what you mean. It should be a prerequisite to have a trial run or pilot study before the actual research study begins. This ensures that everyone, including the researcher, knows how and when to act, and is usually conducted with a smaller sample. Finally, like a good novel, this scripted research needs denouement. The participants should be debriefed so that they know the true purpose of the research and the role they played in it. And this would right any wrongs and leave subjects with a sense of satisfaction rather than a bad taste. The value of the pilot study. The pilot study is an absolute necessity prior to seeking IRB approval. The pilot study serves several functions, but we will look at the top 4. Any surprises in procedures should be identified and corrected before seeking IRB approval. Why? Because if any changes are made after obtaining approval, they must be resubmitted to the board for approval again, a colossal waste of time and resources. Practice builds fluency in conducting the procedure. It is no secret that fledgling researchers develop apparently flawless plans on paper that seldom work smoothly in reality. The pilot test is the place to identify and adjust. Variables may not work together as planned, and this gives participants a chance to give the researcher feedback about any confusing tenets of the pilot. Last but not least, many investigators use online surveys, which can also be riddled with inconsistencies or confusing aspects. In addition to having a small group of participants pilot an online instrument, the researcher should also take the assessment. Participants must be provided with an exact, precise, written document to be signed if they give consent to take part in the study. It should be free of jargon and easy to comprehend. Every factor in the study that might influence the person as to whether to participate must be spelled out. If the subjects are children, then the child must give consent after being provided with a form written at his or her reading level, and parents must sign as well. For special investigations on culturally and personally sensitive issues, the researcher must gather a list of resources for participants which identifies where they might find help to ameliorate the effects of experiencing these things in life. The informed consent document also should give the participant an idea of the time demands and the locations where the study will take place. It should be reiterated to the subject that participation is voluntary, and there will be no repercussions if they decide to drop out. The subject has the right to know if the study utilizes any experimental procedures and whether any pain or risk is involved. Questions on a survey that cause discomfort may be skipped. Finally, confidentiality measures must be listed, including an explanation of how files will be maintained. When we compare qualitative and quantitative methodologies, a main difference between the two approaches to research is that the quantitative researchers prefer the structure of numbers to suggest relationships and trends, whereas qualitative studies seek to find richness and depth within the context of the study. The quantitative approach values objectivity, which can be suspect, while the qualitative researcher embraces subjectivity, and while bias is to be avoided, it is acknowledged as a reality. Neither approach is better than the other. Researchers should choose the approach more likely to develop data to answer their questions. Of late, the research committee has begun to support mixed methods research, which is a blend of the two approaches. If this information would be useful, I provide my email address at the end of the presentation so that the reader may request an electronic copy of this presentation to read at more length. Research instruments. The fastest way to obtain a large amount of data appears to be the survey approach. You can reinvent the wheel and make your own, or access the multitudinous pre-tested questionnaires available online. Though the phone or paper-pencil methods work, the process is much more streamlined and easier to analyze if data is collected online. Experimental research is the way to go if you are seeking cause and effect relationships, though it is a time-consuming process in which very little room for error exists. It requires IRB approval from your university. Observation is a popular qualitative method, but it is also appropriately used to generate quantitative data when the recorded information is structured and available in large quantities. Finally, accessing historical data to analyze trends and suggestions of relationships for further examination is one way to conduct an unobtrusive research approach. Don't reinvent the wheel. Web research and resources. Follow the links to these excellent resources and templates for the ideas and protocols discussed earlier. These should save time as well as give more in-depth information on each topic. Thank you for your attention. Good luck embarking on your research journey. In order to utilize the links on the previous slides, you may desire an electronic copy of the presentation. If so, feel free to email and request the file. Other than the web links listed on slide number 9, these are the scholarly references used to complete the information contained in this presentation. Thank you very much.